Welcome to the third installment of Waterdeep Dragon Heist Campaign Diaries. My name is Ray, and the channel is called Ray Tales. We start the session in the barracks with a defeated Zimp and Krentz. There is a furniture piled up around one of the doors in the room. The PCs didn't want to investigate the piled up furniture. They were hurt and out of spells, so they decided to take a long rest. Karn cast an alarm spell with audible sound. Zindran and Anvil take first watch. The gray ooze in the other room moves under the door shortly after the party winds down. The alarm bell goes off, waking everyone up. They discover a wet patch of stone floor that wasn't there when they started their rest. Zindran moves up to try to move the furniture or open the door being blocked by the furniture, and that is when the gray ooze attacks Zindran. Hits him for like 3 bludgeoning and 11 acid damage. The ooze also damages Zindran's armor, so his armor is at -1, providing less armor class. They figure out that they got to deal with this, so initiative is rolled, and the party is going first, actually, for the most part. All but Anvil, he's kind of lagging behind everybody. At the beginning of this fight with the gray ooze, one of the goblin scouts who reported the presence of the PCs to Grumshar decides to move down to the barracks door from his side of the hideout because he surmises the PCs should have already arrived to rescue the prisoner. The goblin makes it to the door, then he listens. Combat begins, and right after the first sounds, the goblin decides to leap into the fray. Goblin rolls initiative. Varen is the first character to act during the first round of the combat with the ooze. Zindran ends up casting Cure Wounds on himself during his first turn because he got hit pretty hard by the ooze. So Karn starts up his blade song and then casts Firebolt, which hits the ooze for 7 fire damage. The ooze only takes like 3 of the fire damage. So the party learns something from that little combat encounter. The goblin then enters his initiative order at 14, but his turn was taken up moving to the door before combat and listening at the door. Sedek stated she was sleeping by the unopened door in the room with her rapier and dagger at hand. She attacks the ooze with her dagger, scoring 6 piercing damage against it. Her dagger took damage from the acid, and she just leaves it on the floor. The ooze flails its pseudopod at the nearest PC, but fails to connect with it. Anvil's turn comes up. He swings his light hammer, or throws his light hammer, I don't remember which one, at the ooze, causing 6 bludgeoning damage to it. And his hammer ends up taking damage also. So from here on out, his hammer is going to have -1 to hit and attack rolls. Varen's turn. Her turn was kind of confusing because a lot of it didn't get copied over into Foundry, and she was rolling a lot of stuff in D&D Beyond. But also what she did was she actually pulled out a torch. She lit it, and she used it initially against the ooze, which didn't really do a whole lot of damage. I think it did 1 bludgeoning damage and 1 fire damage. When Zindra's turn comes up, he casts Toll the Dead on the ooze, which fails its saving throw and kills the ooze with 9 points of necrotic damage. That's when the goblin bursts through the door to stare down Sedek. So the gobby swings its scimitar at Sedek, hitting her for 4 slashing damage. Karn turn rolls around and he stabs with his rapier at the goblin, but he misses it. Sedek follows up with a stab from his rapier and dagger. The dagger finds its mark for 8 points of piercing damage, which killed the goblin because it only had 7 hit points left. That ends the combat. They could hear a deep voice yelling at them that they would not rescue their friend in time. The PCs moved out of the barracks and down the hallway into a long hall where Grumshar is standing over this red blonde-haired prisoner with his foot on the prisoner's chest, and he had fire wreathed around his clenched fist. Seated on a raised platform, watching, is a figure with these large white eyes, rubbery purple skin, that had 4 tentacles encircling its mouth. The black-robed figure watched while petting this disembodied brain with feet. So the party had an idea what they were up against, or at least the players did, maybe not the PCs. They try to talk. They figure this is not going to happen, so combat ensues. Varen wins initiative again. So this time Varen opens fire at Grumshar with her bow and hits him for 8 piercing damage in his chest. Grumshar is not looking good at this time. Sadek moves up by a set of double doors to the left of the raised platform, and she stabs Grumshar with her rapier, hitting him with a 10 attack roll, which was the lowest she could get, minimum hit him. Her rapier are 10 piercing damage, killing Grumshar because he only had 1 hit point left anyway after taking that arrow from Varen's to his chest. Anvil actually had dropped his hammer before he came into this room. He pulls out a crossbow, and a light crossbow, and he fires an arrow at the Mind Flayer, hitting him for 3 piercing damage. Now, this is my 3rd time running this adventure for our group, and no group has ever attacked this Mind Flayer. Now, this time, the Mind Flayer did roll low on his initiative, and previous 2 times I rolled, the Mind Flayer had rolled either 1st or 2nd, and he was able to just do what he did and then leave unharmed. But this time, the party had 1 initiative, decided to attack the Mind Flayer. The Mind Flayer's turn, he sets the little intellect devourer down. He strolls to the top of the stairs leading down to the double doors that Sadek is standing in front of. I believe at this point is when he asked her to move out of his way. And he casts Dominate Monster on Sadek. And Sadek rolls a 15 on her saving throw, which is high enough to shrug it off. So Floon gets up from being prone after Grumshar dies and runs towards Anvil and Zendrin for safety, thanking them for rescuing him. Karn steps up with his blade song going, then tries to stab the Mind Flayer with a rapier. He rolled an 11 and a 14 due to advantage. He missed. And he had a dagger strike where he rolled a 10 and an 8 due to advantage, and he missed Mind Flayer. So we're all chuckling at this point, but it's not really funny because I think they really want to kill this Mind Flayer. I think a few of them really thought they could do it. I don't know if all of them did, but I think a few of them thought they could kill this Mind Flayer. So Zendrin, the cleric, casts Toll the Dead on the Mind Flayer, and then the Mind Flayer rolls a 20 for a saving throw for a total of 26, and shrugs off that weak spell from Zendrin. So then the Intellect Devourer moves to attack Karn. He moves to the corner of the stairs. I think he got down the stairs a little bit where he's able to actually be adjacent with Karn and attack Karn. He rolls an 11 for the claw attack and misses, and then he tries to devour Karn's intellect. But Karn is probably the highest intelligence character in our game, and he rolls a 17 on his intelligence saving throw, and he takes no damage from the Intellect Devourer, and that ends round 1. Beginning of round 2, they still are thinking they could take this Mind Flayer. So Varen fires an arrow, but misses. Sadek is standing in the Mind Flayer's way, so it cannot leave. So Sadek stabs with her rapier, missing with a 9, and then her dagger hitting with a 15. And Sadek does 7 piercing damage to the Mind Flayer, and then uses Cunning Action after a reminder from Karn to disengage, then move away from the Mind Flayer. Anvil the Paladins Turn comes up, and he fires another bolt from his light crossbow, hitting the Mind Flayer for 6 piercing damage. So they've done some decent little damage to the Mind Flayer, but he's still got plenty of hit points. So finally, the Mind Flayer says, well, he doesn't say anything, but he does get fed up with being pelted with arrows and bolts and being stabbed with rapiers and daggers. He turns so he can blast everyone in the room except for Karn and Floon. I'm sort of worried that there might be a almost TPK, but not really, because they had a couple of rounds basically wailing on this Mind Flayer, this poor Mind Flayer. He's just trying to leave. So Sadek fails her intelligence saving throw by rolling a 9. Varen passes her intelligence saving throw by rolling 18, and Zendrin fails his by rolling a 16. I believe. Yeah, I think they needed a 17 if I remember right. Anvil fails his saving throw by rolling a 4 on his intelligence saving throw. The only two that failed were Sadek and Anvil, the rogue and the paladin. The two people that was hurting the Mind Flayer the most. So Sadek and Anvil are stunned. They drop prone. They drop anything they're holding, and they take 22 psychic damage. Now, I actually rolled the psychic damage and got average. So I should have just taken whatever it said in the book. I think it was 22. I could be wrong, but I thought it was average that I rolled. Sadek only had 19 hit points left, so she goes unconscious. Anvil takes 20 of the hit points out of the 22, and he drops. Floon immediately moves over to Anvil on his turn and performs a medicine check, and I rolled a 12 and stabilized Anvil. Karn is continuing to fight the Intellect Devourer, and his rolls are getting better, but with his rapier, he rolls a 9 and a 25 on attack rolls due to advantage, and his dagger, he rolled a 25 and a 9 due to advantage, so both of those attacks hit the Intellect Devourer for 6 piercing and 5 piercing damage, and the Intellect Devourer only had 11, so it dies. And then Zendrin performs a medicine check on Sadek and rolls a 17, thus stabilizing Sadek. Combat ends. The Mind Flayer escapes. Karn, at some point, rolls an Arcana check and gets a 25. He learns more information about the Intellect Devourer. Intellect Devourers are creations of the Illithid, and the Mind Flayers breed the Devourers to roam the Underdark so they can hunt. The Devourer can detect the presence and locations of any creatures within 300 feet of it that has an intelligence score of 3 or higher. The Devourer can consume the intellect of a creature it can see within 10 feet of it if it has a brain. And then once the intellect is consumed, the Devourer can consume the target's brain, teleports into the target's skull to take control of the creature. And the Intellect Devourer has some damage resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage from non-magical attacks. And is also immune to the blind condition. So Varen rushes up to search the stone seat that the Illithid was sitting on, and she finds a stash of coins that are basically, 16 gold pieces, 82 silver pieces, 250 copper pieces, and 2 healing potions in this stash. She immediately gives Sadek and Anvil the healing potions and restored 6 and 3 hit points respectively. And they ended up carrying out 16 gold pieces, 82 silver pieces, 250 copper pieces, and a spell book with 6 first level spells that are valued at 350 gold. They also carried out 1 Intellect Devourer body and 1 Gazer body. Leaving the sewer, stopping by the Midnight Reverie, which they had visited previously, which is my own creation, a shop of my own creation that basically they sell some food, some magic services, some magic items every now and then, and the sisters are a source of info if they want to use them. only shop that they knew about at the time, and they could have rolled a history check. Some of them could, because some of them have been in Waterdeep for a few years. So I would have given them, some kind of history check. They ended up at the Midnight Reverie, selling Intellect Devourer and the Gazer bodies for like 150 gold pieces total. They ended up with 2 potions of water breathing and 2 potions of growth. I believe Karn also made a deal with the sisters to basically front him some ink so he could copy. I think he could copy like 5 of those spells out of the spell book. He negotiated taking the ink, or by getting the ink fronted to him so he could copy the 5 spells, and then he would just give them the spell book. So he owes them the spell book, which I hope he remembers, and I hope he honors that. So that'll be an interesting twist if he doesn't. But we'll see. It's up to him. I don't care. I don't care what he does. I'll react, and I've got an idea of how they would react. So it'll be good. So then the PCs leave the Midnight Reverie. They go back to the Yawning Portal, where they are met by Volo Godarm. And Volo is very happy to see the PCs at his friend Floon. The PCs do raise some concern, or at least one PC raised concern. I think it was Zendrin. Raised concern that with the payment situation. But they had already agreed that they were going to get the 10 gold pieces each up front, which they already have, and he would pay them with the deed. They actually pressured him into revealing it before they took the job. Yeah, Volo said, hey, look, you're going to get the deed, but we can't do it till tomorrow. You need to meet me at high sun, tomorrow at the magistrate's office to sign the deed over to them. But he hands them the key to the tavern, and he says, hey, go spend the night in the tavern, look around, and see how you like it. Meet me tomorrow. And they said, okay, cool. So they left, and they started exploring the tavern. And then they met Lif. He initially tried to scare them away by writing messages in the dust. I think he said, get out. And they recognized him immediately. They're like, oh, something's going on. And they looked around. They couldn't find this thing. And then the paladin said, I'm just going to use my ability. He found out that there was an undead within 30 feet of him. Or 60 feet of him. Whatever his ability is. I had to look it up again. So, I think it's 30, but it could be 60. But, regardless, Lif was actually in the room with them. He wasn't hiding behind he wasn't behind total cover, so, that Lif was in the room with them. So then they started having a little discussion in the dust about what was going on with Lif. And I don't know that he actually told them everything about him. I think that's going to come up later. But I think he told them the gist that, hey, I think he did tell them that he was the bartender at the tavern. Maybe he didn't, but they'll find this out here shortly because they're planning on talking to him more. But Lif did tell him that he wanted to see the tavern open back up for business. And if they were going to do that, then cool. If not, then, they'd have to deal with him haunting them. And so, for the meantime, the party placated Lif. And now there's an ongoing discussion on what to name the tavern and what to name their group, because they either need to name the tavern, which I'll accept either way. They can name the tavern and then put that on the deed, or they can name themselves as an adventuring group, and I'll put that on the deed. That's what their deed will say. And then they're also discussing finding out more about Lif. Like I said earlier, I think that's what they were planning on doing all along, because a lot of the names involve naming it after Lif, and there's some concern that they want to figure out if Lif's an asshole or not. Because if Lif was an asshole, they don't want to name the tavern after Lif. So, we'll find out more about that. Hopefully this session, that will be tonight. All right, so we end the session with a long rest at the new tavern. And that's where we'll pick up tonight on the 5th episode of Waterdeep Dragon Heist.